elsewhere he cold right will lay down the law, but in his house was meek as is a daw. Davy Lindsay. There has been Jock Driver the carrier here, speering about his new graith, said Mrs. Saddletree to her husband, as he crossed his threshold, not with the purpose, by any means, of consulting him upon his own affairs, but merely to intimate, by a gentle recapitulation, how much duty she had gone through in his absence. "Weel," replied Bardaline, and deigned not a word more. "And the Laird of Girdingburst has had his running footman here, and see't himsel', he's a civil pleasant young gentleman, to see when the broidered saddlecloth for his sorrel horse will be ready, for he wants it again the Kelso races." "Weel, a weel," replied Bardaline, as laconically as before. "And his lordship, the Earl of Blazonbury, Lord Flash and Flame, is like to be clean daft, that the harness for the 6 Flanders meres, why the crests, coronets, housings, and mountings conform, are no sent hame according to promise Jean." "Weel, good wife," said Saddletree, "if he gangs daft, we'll hae him cognost, it's a very weel." "It's weel that ye think sae, Mr. Saddletree," answered his helpmate, rather nettled at the indifference with which her report was received. "There's mony ane wad hae thought themselves affronted, if a sae mony customers had see't and naebody to answer them but women folk, for a' the lads were aff, as soon as your back was turned, to see Porteous hanged, that might be counted upon, and sae, ye no being at hame." "Houts, Mrs. Saddletree," said Bardaline, with an air of consequence, "dinna deed me why your nonsense. I was under the necessity of being elsewhere, non omnia, as Mr. Crossmalouf said, when he was called by 2 macers at once, non omnia possumus, possumus. I ken our Latin offends Mr. Butler's ears, but it means, naebody, and it were the Lord President himsel', can do TWA turns at ants." "Very right, Mr. Saddletree," answered his careful helpmate, with a sarcastic smile, "and nae doubt it's a decent thing to leave your wife to look after young gentlemen's saddles and bridles, when ye gang to see a man, that never did ye ill, raxing a halter." "Woman," said Saddletree, assuming an elevated tone, to which the meridian had somewhat contributed, "desist, I say forbear, from intromitting with affairs thou canst not understand. D'ye think I was born to sit here brogging in Elshon through Benleather, when sick men is Duncan Forbes, and that other Arnest and Shield there, without muckle greater parts, if the close-heads speak true, than Misselmon be presidents and king's advocates, nae doubt, and wha but they? Whereas, were favour equally distribute, as in the days of the White Wallace." "I ken naething we wad hae gotten by the White Wallace," said Mrs. Saddletree, "unless, as I hae heard the auld folk tell, they fought in they days wi' Benleather guns, and then it's a chance but what, if he had bought them, he might have forgot to pay for them. And as for the greatness of your parts, Bartley, the folk in the close-head asterisk mon ken mair about them than I do, if they make sic a report of them." Asterisk, close-head, the entrance of a blind alley. "I tell ye, woman," said Saddletree, in high dudgeon, "that ye ken naething about these matters. In Sir William Wallace's days there was nae man pinned down to sic a slavish work as a saddlers, for they got ony leather graith that they had used for ready-made out of Holland." "Well," said Butler, who was, like many of his profession, something of a humorist and dry joker, "if that be the case, Mr. Saddletree, I think we have changed for the better, since we make our own harness, and only import our lawyers from Holland." "It's our true, Mr. Butler," answered Bardaline, with a sigh, "if I had had the luck, or rather, if my father had had the sense to send me to Leyden and Utrecht to learn the substitutes and pandects." "You mean the institutes, Justinian's institutes, Mr. Saddletree," said Butler. "Institutes and substitutes are synonymous words, Mr. Butler, and used indifferently as such in deeds of tailly, as you may see in Balfour's Practiques, or Dallas of St. Martin's Styles. I understand these things pretty weel, I thank God, but I own I should have studied in Holland." "To comfort you, you might not have been farther forward than you are now, Mr. Saddletree," replied Mr. Butler, "for our Scottish advocates are an aristocratic race. Their brass is of the right Corinthian quality, and non quibus contigit adire Corinthum aha, Mr. Saddletree?" And Mr. Butler, rejoined Bartoline, upon whom, as may be well supposed, the jest was lost, and all but the sound of the words, ye said a glyph sign it was Cavis, and now I heard ye say Quivus with my own ears, as plain as ever I heard a word at the forebar. Give me your patience, Mr. Saddletree, and I'll explain the discrepancy in 3 words, said Butler, as pedantic in his own department, though with infinitely more judgment and learning, as Bartoline was in his self-assumed profession of the law. Give me your patience for a moment. You'll grant that the nominative case is that by which a person or thing is nominated or designed, and which may be called the primary case, all others being formed from it by alterations of the termination in the learned languages, and by prepositions in our modern Babylonian jargons. You'll grant me that, I suppose, Mr. Saddletree? I dinna ken whether I will or no ad avicendum. Ye ken naebody should be in a hurry to make admissions, either in point of law, or in point of fact, said Saddletree, looking, or endeavoring to look, as if he understood what was said. And the dative case, continued Butler. I ken what a tutor dative is, said Saddletree, readily enough. The dative case, resumed the grammarian, is that in which anything is given or assigned as properly belonging to a person or thing. You cannot deny that, I am sure. I am sure I'll no grant it, though, said Saddletree. Then, what the devil do ye take the nominative and the dative cases to be, said Butler, hastily, and surprised at once out of his decency of expression and accuracy of pronunciation. I'll tell you that at leisure, Mr. Butler, said Saddletree, with a very knowing look. I'll take a day to see and answer every article of your condescendence, and then I'll hold you to confess or deny as accords. Come, Mr. Saddletree, said his wife, we'll hae nae confessions and condescendences here. Let them deal in they sort o' wares that are paid for them. They suit the like o' us as all as a demi-peak saddle would suit a draft ox. Said Mr. Butler, optat Phippia boss pigger, nothing new under the sun, but it was a fair hit of Mrs. Saddletree, however. And it would far better become ye, Mr. Saddletree, continued his helpmate, since ye say ye hae skill o' the law, to try if ye can do anything for Effie Deans, poor thing, that's lying up in the toll booth yonder, cold, and hungry, and comfortless, a servant lass of ours, Mr. Butler, and as innocent a lass, to my thinking, and as useful in the shop when Mr. Saddletree gangs out, and ye're aware he's seldom at hame when there's ony o' the pleahouses open. Poor Effie used to help me to tumble the bundles o' bark and leather up and down, and range out the goods, and suit a body's humours, and troth, she could I please the customers why her answers, for she was I civil, and a bonnier lass wasna in Auld Reekie. And when folk were hasty and unreasonable, she could serve them better than me, that am no sae young as I hae been, Mr. Butler, and a wee bit short in the temper into the bargain. For when there's ouramony folks crying on me at aince, and none but a tongue to answer them, folk maun speak hastily, or they'll ne'er get through their work. Say I miss Effie daily. Did die in DM, added Saddletree. I think, said Butler, after a good deal of hesitation, I have seen the girl in the shop, a modest-looking, fair-haired girl? Aye, that's just poor Effie, said her mistress. How she was abandoned to hersel, or whether she was sackless o' the sinful deed, God in heaven knows, but if she's been guilty, she's been sair tempted, and I wad mayest take my Bible aith she hasna been hersel at the time. Butler had by this time become much agitated. He fidgeted up and down the shop, and showed the greatest agitation that a person of such strict decorum could be supposed to give way to. Was not this girl, he said, the daughter of David Deans, that had the parks at St. Leonard's taken? And has she not a sister? In troth has she, poor Jeanie Deans, 10 years older than hersel. She was here greeting a wee while sign about her tiddy. And what could I say to her, but that she behoved to come and speak to Mr. Saddletree when he was at hame? It wasna that I thought Mr. Saddletree could do her or ony ither body muckle good or ill, but it would I serve to keep the poor thing's heart up for a wee while, and let sorrow come when sorrow maun. Ye're mista'en though, good wife, said Saddletree scornfully, for I could hae Jean her great satisfaction. I could hae proved to her that her sister was indicted upon the statute 1690, Chapter 1, for the mere ready prevention of child murder, for concealing her pregnancy, and giving no account of the child which she had borne. I hope, said Butler, I trust in a gracious God, that she can clear herself. And say do I, Mr. Butler, replied Mrs. Saddletree. I am sure I what hae answered for her as my own daughter, but ways my heart, I had been tender as the simmer, and scarce hour the door of my room for 12 weeks. And as for Mr. Saddletree, he might be in a lying-in hospital, and ne'er find out what the women cam there for. Say I could see little or nathing o' her, or I what hae had the truth o' her situation out o' her, I see warrant ye, but we think her sister maun be able to speak something to clear her. The hale Parliament House, said Saddletree, was speaking o' nathing else, till this job o' Porteous has put it out o' head. It's a beautiful point of presumptive murder, and there's been naughty like it in the Justiciar Court since the case of Lucky Smith the Howdye, that suffered in the year 1679. But what's the matter, why you, Mr. Butler, said the good woman, ye are looking as white as a sheet, will ye tak a dram? By no means, said Butler, compelling himself to speak. I walked in from Dumfries yesterday, and this is a warm day. Sit down, said Mrs. Saddletree, laying hands on him kindly, and rest ye, ye'll kill yoursel, man, at that rate, and are we to wish you joy o' getting the skule, Mr. Butler? Yes, no, I do not know, answered the young man vaguely. But Mrs. Saddletree kept him to point, partly out of real interest, partly from curiosity. Ye dinna ken whether ye are to get the free skule o' Dumfries or no, after hinging on and teaching it at the simmer? No, Mrs. Saddletree, I am not to have it, replied Butler, more collectedly. The Laird of Black at the Bane had a natural son bred to the kirk, that the presbytery could not be prevailed upon to license, and so. Ye need say nae mair about it. If there was a laird that had a puir kinsman or a bastard that it wad suit, there's enough said, and Yuri Ian come back to Liberton to wait for dead men's shoon, and for as frail as Mr. Wackbairn is, he may live as lang as you, that are his assistant and successor. Very like, replied Butler, with a sigh, I do not know if I should wish it otherwise. Nae doubt, it's a very vexing thing, continued the good lady, to be in that dependent station, and you that hae right and title to say ye muckle better. I wonder how ye bear these crosses. Quos diligit castigat, answered Butler, even the pagan Seneca could see an advantage in affliction. The heathens had their philosophy, and the Jews their revelation, Mrs. Saddletree, and they endured their distresses in their day. Christians have a better dispensation than either, but doubtless. He stopped and sighed. I ken what ye mean, said Mrs. Saddletree, looking toward her husband. There's whiles we lose patience in spite of baith book and Bible, but ye are no gone awa, and looking say poorly ye'll stay and take some kale wi us? Mr. Saddletree laid aside Balfour's Practiques, his favourite study, and much good may it do him, to join in his wife's hospitable importunity. But the teacher declined all entreaty, and took his leave upon the spot. There's something in this, said Mrs. Saddletree, looking after him as he walked up the street. I wonder what makes Mr. Butler sae distressed about Effie's misfortune. There was nae acquaintance atween them that ever I saw or heard of, but they were neighbours when David Deans was on the Laird o' Dumbidyke's land. Mr. Butler wad ken her father, or some o' her folk to get up. Mr. Saddletree, ye have set yoursel down on the very brechem that wants stitching, and here's little Willie, the prentice, ye little rind there odd deal that ye are. What takes you raking through the gutters to see folk hang it? How would ye like when it comes to be your ain chance, as I winna ensure ye, if ye dinna mend your manners, and what are ye maundering and greeting for, as if a word were breaking your banes, gangin' by, and ba. Better bairn another time, and tell Peggy to gie a bicker o' broth, for ye'll be as gleg as a gled, I see warrant ye to. It's a fatherless bairn, Mr. Saddletree, and motherless, whilk in some cases may be war, and ane would take care o' him if they could. It's a Christian duty. Very true, good wife, said Saddletree in reply. We are in loco parentis to him during his years of pupillarity, and I hae had thoughts of applying to the court for a commission as factor loco tutoris, seeing there is nae tutor nominate, and the tutor at law declines to act. but only I fear the expense of the procedure would not be in rem versam, for I am not aware if Willie has ony effects whereof to assume the administration. He concluded this sentence with a self-important cough, as one who has laid down the law in an indisputable manner. "Effects," said Mrs. Saddletree, "what effects has the poor wean? He was in rags when his mother died, and the blue polony that Effie made for him out of an old mantle of my ain was the first decent dress the bairn ever had on." Poor Effie! "Can you tell me now really, why a your law, will her life be in danger, Mr. Saddletree, when they arena able to prove that ever there was a bairn Ava?" "Hooey," said Mr. Saddletree, delighted at having for once in his life seen his wife's attention arrested by a topic of legal discussion. "Hooey, there are two sorts of murdrum or murdragium, or what you popular writer et vulgaris call murther. I mean there are many sorts, for there's your murthrum per vigilias et insidias, and your murthrum under trust." "I am sure," replied his moiety, "that murther by trust is the way that the gentry murther us merchants, and whiles make us shut the booth up, but that has naething to do why Effie's misfortune." "The case of Effie, or Euphemia, Deans," resumed Saddletree, "is one of those cases of murder presumptive, that is, a murder of the law's inferring or construction, being derived from certain indicia or grounds of suspicion." "So that," said the good woman, "unless poor Effie has communicated her situation, she'll be hanged by the neck, if the bairn was stillborn, or if it be alive at this moment?" "Assuredly," said Saddletree, "it being a statute made by our sovereign lord and lady, to prevent the horrid delict of bringing forth children in secret, the crime is rather a favourite of the law, this species of murther being one of its own creation." "Then, if the law makes murders," said Mrs. Saddletree, "the law should be hanged for them, or if they wad hang a lawyer instead, the country wad find nae foe." A summons to their frugal dinner interrupted the farther progress of the conversation, which was otherwise like to take a turn much less favourable to the science of jurisprudence and its professors, than Mr. Bartoline Saddletree, the fond admirer of both, had at its opening anticipated.